بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله ونستغفر الله ونتوب إليه ونعتمد عليك ونتوجه إليه ونصلي ونسلم على الذي أرسلته بالهدى ودين الحق اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi, he always used to recite the hadith, "May yuridullahu bihi khayran yufaqihu fi din." Some of the ulama, they begin their classes with that the person that Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala wants good for them, Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala gives them understanding of the deen, and that allows them at least to facilitate their life realities. We're going to do some review, and then we're going to come, the time that we have, we're going to come back down to the issue of the obligations of wudu plus a little more. But this is one of the issues, the issue of fiqh overall, which most of the Muslims today don't have an understanding of. And basically what it means is that a lot of times we're practicing and we don't really know what we're practicing. We have a general understanding of what's going on. The colonial powers, one of the things that they did was to change the educational system, but we Muslims chose not to give priority to our own development as Muslims and function in the world. I mean, we can't blame the colonial powers in that regard, because the issue of playing the power game in the deen, human beings, they go through that. There's no time in history that you really can't see that doesn't take place, where you have something, I don't play by the rules, I want it, I go and I take it. That's basically the bottom line game. So the issue of not understanding how to practice the deen is one thing, but the other issue is not understanding how to think with the deen. How to think with the deen. Like, that's why we kind of go slow and we go through these processes. Like, you know, how is it that we come to a fiqh and understanding, you know, without any evidences? You know, that becomes extremely problematic. And the evidences is not just the issue that you provide me a hadith. The evidences is that I need to understand how to use that hadith. And the evidence is not just that I'm following my madhab, and then when you have your madhab, I follow Abu Hanifa, you follow Imam Ahmed, and then we go into a war or a battle over that. That's not the intention of the madhab. The intention of the madhab is not to isolate every community like the madhab is its own ethnic group. If we understand the history of fiqh properly, we understand that the development of these madhab, and they have good and they have bad. There's no madhab that is equal to deen, because we have Quran, Sunnah, and then we have ijtihad. And ijtihad is the researching into the book and the Sunnah and applying. And that's basically what the madhab, they did. They looked at Quran, Sunnah, and then this research into issues that were not clear. And so all of that was based on the understanding of the Sahaba. So with time, it increases. Is everybody clear on this point? And so it became an issue of how do we practice the deen. But if we talk about the role of ijtihad, the role of ijtihad is how do we apply the Quran and the Sunnah in situations which are not clear. Like, for instance, in this country, we have fiqh opinions that nobody else is practicing. Tomorrow or tonight is Jummah. And many masajid have 2 Jummas, 3 Jummas. They have a Jummah in the basement, and then there's people at the top on the 2nd floor. These things were never part of how we practice as Muslims. Or they have a Jummah and the Jummah is outside of the community. If you actually go with depth and you look at the madhab of Abu Hanifa and you look at the madhab of Imam Malik, there's no such thing as practicing without a community. There's no such thing. As a matter of fact, the Imam Abu Hanifa went further and talked about the issue of civilization outside of the masjid. In other words, where's the city at? And even if you go, one of the young brothers was telling me recently that he studied, he was saying how he was in Mauritania and he was in the desert and he had to get used to the fact that they were not even establishing Jummah, because in the madhab of Imam Malik, if there's no Jami'i masjid, no centralized masjid, and then other masajid that live, that are kind of around it, they shut down and then everybody kind of goes to that one space. Technically speaking, in the old fiqh, there's no Jummah, in the sense that there's details to that. But the point being is that it's not just the issue that we come and we practice as individuals and we come together in our individual practice. There was a concept of community. And so that issue of understanding the deen and how it applies is very important. So the scholars, they go through these processes, and people, look, if I told you that you had to study this in order to feed your family, the whole masjid will be here full. That's just the reality. The whole masjid will be full. And so, but if I tell you that you need to know this as a Muslim, well, it's not the same type of priority. So the scholars, they go through this process of trying to explain to us how it is that we understand how to practice Islam. So we take the issue of wudu by itself. How it is that we come to an understanding wudu. And we said this, and the Hanafi madhab, the choice opinion for the way that they define wudu is nadafa, is cleanliness. For the other madhab, they give a more technical definition. So there should be some issues, like for instance, with this type of concept, that the wudu, how many times do we make wudu a day, ideally speaking? Maybe five. So on a civilizational level, if this means cleanliness, although we know that this is also tied to an act of ibadah, the issue of nadafa, then, when we start talking about our lifestyle as Muslims, if we want to talk about psychologically the benefits of cleanliness, Shah Waliullah rahimahullah in Hujjatul al-Baligha, he talks about how the wudu, it refreshes you. And we know sometimes you're down and out, or sometimes you're stressed out from work and you go, or it's hot, and you go and you start to clean up and you start to do wudu and you feel fresh. Or sometimes you wake up and you're like, you're completely not there, and you make ghusl and you feel good. You put on your oils, you do your hair. You see what I'm saying? This goes into the issue of our identity as Muslims. So this has another aspect. The other aspect is how we conduct our affairs. Along with the issue of the cleanliness of the bathrooms and the cleanliness of the house and the cleanliness of the restaurants, it becomes an issue. Okay, wow, mashallah, let's beautify the environment. And then it becomes, mashallah, alhamdulillah, look at the beautiful nature of this. Then it becomes, well, let's beautify our dress. Oh, mashallah, let's organize ourselves. Let's beautify the way that we do things. And then you start to go into the issue of ihsan. So I wanted to say that, there's other aspects to this that sometimes we forget as Muslims. Sometimes I hear from some people, I've even read this type of thing. Sometimes people look at some of the Hindus and then they say, well, the Hindu restaurant is more clean than the Muslim restaurant. That type of thing. Okay, fine. What does that mean at the end of the day? Does that mean that, what are you saying? Okay, so now you want to go to the Hindu restaurant because it's more clean than the Muslim restaurant? Now now you feel that, that they're better than you? You see what I'm saying? Up to where does this go? So the issue becomes the psychology. The psychology has to be developed properly. So in review, fiqh, the wudu, we need it for salah. We need it for reciting Quran. And we said that in the Hanafi madhab here, it's not just the issue, it's not the issue per se of reciting the Quran, it's really the issue of touching the Quran. It's the issue really of touching the Quran. And the madhab is very strict on that, and Hanafi madhab is not the only one. But that's not the only opinion. But still, in any event, this is how we're learning. To make tawaf around the Kaaba. Right? And we said that wudu is studied before ghusl because you need it. You need it on a continuous basis. So terminologically, or basically, when we look at the language, the Arabic language, we talked about the wudu. It means the legislated washing. And some of them, they bring it back to the word wudu or cleanliness. So the author said brightness, but cleanliness, right? And so here wudu, technically, it means washing, right? And then here, wudu, it means the water that's used. In the Sharia meaning, this word wudu takes on a meaning in the Quran and the Sunnah. So it means that you have to do a particular action of purification, right? That's commanded by the Quran and is detailed by the Sunnah with water, a specific type of water, not just any water, specific type of water. And all of those things, they have their evidences. And one of the things that we mentioned was that there was a hadith that said Jibril came to the Prophet ﷺ when the revelation first started to come, and he taught him how to make wudu and salah, right? And this was around the time, right before Hijrah, right before Hijrah, according to Mullah Ali Qari, about a year or so. And so the act of the wudu itself, I don't want to go into a lot of details, but it's supported by the Quran, the Sunnah, and the consensus of the believers. Meaning, this is something we don't disagree upon, as an ummah. Okay, so now we come back to a little bit of a review of where we want to be. So we said that there were 5 types of water. Right. This is the water that's number 1 is the water that we rely upon. It's water that's pure in itself and it's purifying. Yes, it's fresh, clean. No change in the color, no change in the taste, no change in the smell. Which one? But how about if you don't know? That's the taste. We said 3. If the water needs 3, there's 3, right, qualities to it. It's color. Like if it's purple, it's not water, right? If it smells nasty, and if the taste is bad, say for instance it has a good color, good smell, but pure, not only pure, but it also has to be purifying. Pure in itself and purifying, meaning you can use it for wudu or ghusl. Pure, purifying. Pure, purifying. And so then there's the water that's pure and purifying, but it's not a lot. There's not a lot. Some of you who have animals like cats, this is, this is important from that angle. There's other animals, but I don't want to get into that because that's not too practical for us right now. Because a cat, what do cats like to do? They like to hunt. So the cat may hunt a rat or a mouse or, in the winter time. It doesn't matter if you're in the suburbs or whatever. These little things like to come into your house. And so if you have a cat and it goes and hunts and then you have water out, and for instance, the cat comes and drinks from that water, the fear is that the water is too small to cover the amount. Or the cat will die if it's not like the right water. If it drinks the bad water, yes. So then we come back to this point. Water, okay, is another type. This is makruh. This definitely you can use. This is disliked to use. And this should not be used at all. Water that is pure but not purifying. Water, which one is this? It has lost its taste. It's lost its color. It's lost its smell. Can you use it for wudu? No. Good job. It's not pure. It's not pure. Now what? It's not pure. And so the water is filthy is that water which a little bit of filth has dropped in. And what is considered filth is defined by the Sharia. That's important to understand. There's a beautiful principle. الأصل في الأشياء الطهارة. And that principle is that, this is the beauty. This is the how Islam thinks about things, right? That things are pure. See, maybe we may not see that as coming from a Christian background. In Christianity, there's a concept that everything is condemned because of sin. That's what they see. All of the creation is condemned. And so, and then there's the whole issue that human nature is bad. Right. And that's how, if you go back into like political theories, if you go back into theories of like the social contract and all of that, that's how they look at human nature, is that it's bad. They first look at the evil of the human being. They're like the angels in that regard. The angels say to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَا يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاء. Will you create on the earth, a being that will create corruption and bloodshed? But, that's not how we look at things. We look at we look at the positive side or the good side of the human being. We look at the beautiful aspect of creation. We look at the goodness. So everything is pure unless you have a proof in the Sharia to determine otherwise. So what's considered filthy is what the Sharia determines as such. So water that's doubtful is another type of water. You're not sure, if it's pure or not. And so then we have the obligatory aspects of the wudu. Washing the face, washing the hands up to the forearms and including the elbows, right? Washing a quarter, depending if you have like a, a khimar on your head or a turban, but washing a quarter of the head with the wet hand. Washing the feet and the heels up to and including the ankles. One of the things I wanted to mention is that we have this concept that this is considered fard. It means it's an obligation. Fard and wajib, both of them are obligations, but fard is a primary obligation. And so this is what we call fard, ilmin wa amalan. Is something that we know is an obligation based upon knowledge, and that the action itself is also considered an obligation. And one of the things in the Hanafi madhab that's important, and this is something which is important to teach our children, this is a very technical point, is that in the Hanafi madhab, they divide the evidences into that which is clear, no doubt at all, and that which is possible to have more than one opinion about it, and that which is possible, maybe there may be some chance to doubt the level of strength. You get that point? That's important. Why? Because in this society, there's always the issue of questioning. There's always the issue, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? And then when it comes to religion in today's time period, people like to question. So these, when we say that there are certain things which are clear in the deen and they're established, it's because we say that, okay, this has been researched. We have the evidence for it. It's not just the issue that we're saying is an obligation to do and that's it, but it's also an issue like, for instance, the fard category in the Hanafi madhab, and we didn't mention this before, but a person that denies it has an aqidah issue. Once it's clear, you have an understanding that this is from the deen, to deny it now, it becomes the issue of aqidah. Why would we say that? Why would we say that?
Because that means you're denying Sunnah and Quran and Sunnah. But this fard is coming out of the Quran and Sunnah, right?
Okay, but what about, but as far coming from the Quran and Sunnah, we need something else.
Ijtihad.
What's the opposite of doubt? Huh? No, of kufr, iman. Huh? No, certainty. Certainty, yes, the yaqeen. So, in the Hanafi madhab, they look at the aspect of the yaqeen, the certainty part. Okay? So they look at it as like, hold on a second. This is a clear issue. We thought this through. We researched it. This is clear. This is certain. Okay, this issue, overall, we see that it's, like this hadith, overall we see that is sound, right? But is there some possibility that we may have misunderstood it? Some possibility. They give a little bit of room for it, right? So they give some flexibility. So in general, Quran and Sunnah in general, as a source, yes. We as Muslims, we believe with certainty, Quran, no doubt, period, comes from Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, is revealed. But now there's some ayat of the Quran that are clear, some ayat of the Quran that can be open to understanding. So you had multiple understandings. The Sunnah, there's a group of ahadith that is very clear. Don't come and say there's issues with these ahadith. And then there's another, I'm talking about from the angle of authenticity. And then there's another group of ahadith that, okay, fine, there's some research to it. But overall, we find majority of the Sunnah is within that range. Those are hadith which are fabricated. That's kind of has been indicated to. It's been researched. Those are hadith that may be like weak here or there. Not only have they been researched, but still, even up to now, the scholars of hadith, they still are very meticulous in that. But for whatever we need of a hadith or the Sunnah for the deen, we're not talking about these specialist issues, which only some advanced scholars know. For what we need to practice the deen, that's the Sunnah in that regard is already clear. We don't need, there's not debate, there's no issue. Oh, but does it have to be researched? No, that we have 1,400 years of experience in this as a Muslim ummah. But the point of this is for that level of confidence. So in the wudu, this is the foundation. Okay? So there's some things that are not liked in the wudu. We talked about this before. The issue of wasting water. Right? Slapping water on the face like that. And this issue, seeking assistance from others without reason. In other words, you should do the wudu yourself. But elderly people or sick people, they may need help. So in that case, this doesn't apply to them. But in general, these are things that are disliked. This is a big problem. And I mentioned that before. Most of us are doing this. Wasting tons and tons of water in the wudu. And we won't, and I keep saying that we won't be satisfied until we have a water problem. Then all of a sudden everybody will be meticulous, like if we're in the desert or something and there's only a small amount of water to be used. Right? We have to realize that we have to change our habits. That's why I keep mentioning this. We have a serious climate problem globally. It's a global issue. And so we have to teach our children the value of water for life. And this was something that was clear to the Bedu or the Bedouin in the past, in the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam before, because in the desert, water is not easy to come by. We have to realize that in some places, if you go into the history of those places, there were actual rainforests and they disappeared because they kept taking from the land, cutting the trees, taking from the land, cutting the trees. Right? We see that right now what's taking place. We don't know the actual impact of what's going to happen with all of this burning of stuff in California, with the trees in the Congo burning, with the trees in Brazil burning. And then you go to other places across the world. We don't know what that is going to lead to. So the value of the preciousness of water is important. So those three, not wasting water, not slapping water on the face, right? It should be done, as an act of ibadah. So, it should be an act of reverence and not to seek assistance. Those three things. So what are the three things that are disliked that it's not like to do them in wudu? Assistance. In other words, to get other people to help you. You have to learn how to do it yourself. Well, then you have to learn how to do it. So then the recommended acts, we didn't cover this before. This is something new. 2 recommended acts. Simply put, begin with the right. We do that as in Muslims in general, begin with the right. And then this is done. People don't know about it, the mess of the neck. It's a hadith which is not of the strongest nature, right? Maybe considered a statement of the companion of the tabi'i, so to speak. But overall in the Hanafi madhab, is something that's practiced. It's mustahab. You don't have to practice it. There's people. Sometimes this is the point of debate. Other people come in, they see this, say, "Why are you doing that? Bid'ah." But there's some basis for it, right? There's some basis for it. And even the claim is that it goes back to the Sahabi, right? But the issue of mawquf is that it's broken. It's not completely transmitted, but it goes back to the Sahabi. But that's just for the sake of what? We're not going to go into a lot of details here, because we want you to take away from this 2 acts that are recommended, 3 acts that are makruh, 4 acts that are an obligation. And we bring this type of thing in, so what? So that it has a basis. It's not just that somebody told you, right? So we have like this hadith that says, when you make wudu, wash your right limbs first. There are hadith reported from different ways, different chains of transmission. In other words, different companions have transmitted them to show that the Prophet ﷺ continued to wash his right limbs first in wudu, right? And that it was his regular practice, alayhi salatu wasalam. Aisha, who was his wife, radiallahu anha, she reported the Prophet ﷺ liked to start to do everything from the right, such as purification, the wudu, the ghusl, hair combing, putting on the shoes, and even we can add to that the clothing. So we covered this, and we covered this. This we're not going to cover yet. Why? Because there's a lot. Some books add on to this. They add on more. We need to have the foundation first, so kind of we're dancing around a little bit, so that we can have that foundation. And see, the things that invalidate the wudu are 10 things. Like what? What else? Falling asleep. Good job. You got about 6 of those. Good job.
What was the 6th one?
He said falling asleep. And that brings us to this area. The reason why we do wudu is to make permissible that which is not permissible without wudu. To make permissible, to allow us, in other words, to do those things which require wudu. But there's some conditions. This is not in the book. I had to get this from Nurhul Ida. And in that book, it brings up some point, but I kind of added a little to it, or the way I organized it. There's some conditions that make wudu an obligation, and there's some conditions that tell us that the wudu is sound. Tell us that the wudu is sound. But one of the things, like for instance, from the conditions of obligation, there's the issue, I translated it into what we call mental capacity. And they say aql, or intellect. And so those are 2 things, like one, sanity. Sanity. This is why we don't do drugs. Because drugs, they mess up your brain. And they stop you from being able to think correctly. Same thing with alcohol. Right? This is why it's not allowable in Islam, because the brain or mental capacity It's something that we need to have in order to make good decisions. But sanity needs to be there. And sometimes, we take this lightly, but sometimes we don't take care of those things which need to be taken care of in order to have sanity. Right? We take that lightly, but Islam considers this. Right? Islam looks into it. The other issue is consciousness, like you mentioned, being awake, sleep. So we have to be awake in order to be responsible. If you're sleeping at that point in time, if you're so exhausted you can't even think, you have to get enough rest in order to be able to have enough power to be able to pray. Now, the tricky part here is not to get lazy.
If you sleep while you're doing wudu, then you are wasting water.
Yes. And so then a person that's asleep is not responsible until they wake up. And a person that's in a coma, is not responsible till they come out of the coma. So this part is necessary in order for there to be an obligation. The other issue is puberty. And we leave that up to the adults, to teach their children about puberty. This is important. Either you teach them or somebody else teaches them. But puberty is important. In the Hanafi madhab, there's two opinions. If there's no signs of biological puberty, then it's either 15 or 18 years old. But the general opinion of the madhab is 18 if you can't figure out what the signs are. In other words, as soon as 18 hits, you know for sure, for certain, there's no doubt. But in this society, although it's maybe not popular to say that in the madhab because the madhab has its own opinions. In this society, biological puberty begins way more earlier. Why? Why? To be a big person or like an older person. Some kids, they grow big, they look big, but their age is young. Why do you think? Yes. They have put chemicals in the food which has impacted. And that is not a doubt. Without going into a lot of details, there was a case in Puerto Rico, famous case, you can look it up, where the girls became pubescent and everybody was like, what's going on? It's not a normal age. Not a normal age. So they began to look at the milk and they began to see that the cows were injected. So when we say zabiha halal, why is it that becomes important over just halal?
They say there's pure and halal. Often it's mentioned in the Quran that halal and tayyib.
The zabiha, of course, is how the animal is slaughtered. The halal issue, we've come into debate only in this country for the most part. Part of that was because in the past there was some fatwa that were given to some of the immigrant community that came here, in specific the Arabic speakers, that allowed them to eat from the people of the book. And they gave a very general definition of what that meant. And so even the whole country was considered people of the book. So that kind of then the store owners came in, and everything is halal. But if you go deeper into the meaning of halal, because we have, it's not just one hadith or one ayah of the Quran, we also have, the whole issue of how the animal is raised and how the animal is dealt with and so on and so forth. And then we end up seeing the end results. So when we talk about people being confused about their biological identity, everybody gets me in what I'm saying? You can't eliminate the chemical impacts that are there. It's not politically correct to say this, but you have to look at the chemicals that are in the food. There's even some fish, that the waters are heavily polluted nowadays. Some fish have changed from one category to another category. Flip, look it up. scientific. This is not just conspiracy or I heard here or, uncle said on the website. No, this is factual that there's some issues. So when we talk about zabiha halal, this is extremely important from the angle of, okay, what are we putting in our bodies? It's not just a formality. What are we putting in our bodies to allow us to have the conditions of health? And so the scholars, they looked at that stuff and just, what do we need at a basic level to just talk about the wudu being an obligation or the salah being an obligation? But that's important. But it's not just that we stop there. We have tib al-nabi. Always the food is always looked at as medicine, right? This is one of the major things right now. The whole country is being reformed on this concept. So we have changes in the lunch. We have, they ask you not to have a lot of sugar snacks. They ask you, they ask you to do exercise because they realize they've gone to the opposite end. Just do whatever, and it affects on the biological level and it affects national health. The other issue is freedom, that in order for the wudu to take place, one of the things that needs to be there is that there can be that time of the month for women, so to speak, or what happens after, a child is born. Another issue here, I didn't mention it, is Islam. So these are the conditions that make it an obligation to have the wudu. That there's sanity, that you're awake, conscious, that you're puberty, that you're not in any of these states, and you're Muslim. We're clear with that? These things which invalidate the wudu, I'm going to leave them because those are things that, those things, they are for mature audiences. For mature audiences. So we'll review this a little bit. Okay. The pillars of wudu. And the arba', there are 4. And these are considered from the fard. The first of these is to wash the face, and that's based upon the Quran. Right? And its limit, we said from the top of the forehead, where the hair is. Huh? Yes. Where in the chin? Here? Under here a little bit. And then here to here. This part has to be, right? And then the definition of washing is at least a couple of drops that the water should drop. Not that it's so dry that the water doesn't drop. We didn't cover that last time. The issue of the dropping is part of it, right? And then the second is to wash. This is from the obligations only. There's sunan that come along with it. But we're trying to learn the obligations very clear, right? Is that you wash the hands up to with the arms and including the elbows, You include, not up to the elbow, but you include it, right? A little bit. Once. How many times? Once. Anything above that starts going into the sunnah realm. So if you have to move fast, then you know what the obligation is. Right? The third is to wash the feet with the ankles. And then it says here, the Prophet ﷺ once observed some people performing the wudu while their heels were dry. He said, woe to the dry heels from the fire, hellfire. Perform the wudu. Or actually, this should be, say, perfect the wudu.
Remember you mentioned that the halal between the toes.
Yes.
Sunnah, or is it like
It's from the sunnah.
sunnah?
Yeah.
Because when you take shower, you don't halal the toes, but it's still a wudu, right? Because you just take the shower or do something.
There should everybody you develop like your own, you develop how to do things fast or whatever, but there should be water that goes in between. It's only natural if you're under the shower, That's why some things are left out because it's not relevant to us the way we live. But if you're under the shower, for the most part, everything's gonna be wet. There's some things like the belly button, that you have to make sure underneath the arms, this part here, so inside the ears, right? Those things like that. Of course, if you're doing ghusl, it doesn't. If you're doing wudu, we mentioned that before. If you drench your body, it's automatic. But then when you start going to the ghusl level, it's important. And also another thing that's extremely important, because in the Hanafi madhab is the only madhab that has that it's not an obligation. It's kind of recommendation to have intention that when you need a ghusl because of being an adult, right? You get what I mean? You have to have the intention. Why? On the day of Jummah, why? What's one of the sunnah of Jummah? So then how do you distinguish between a ghusl which is fard and one which is from the sunnah? How? By the intention. That's important. Qadi al-Imrani, he mentioned that point. A lot of times that's missed. That's the only way that you'll be able to distinguish it, because in the Hanafi madhab, technically, you can get under the shower, right? It's a matter of cleanliness, and you have wudu and you're ready to go. Huh? Yeah, the intention is important there. The what? Yes. But that's from the sunnah, right? Yeah. It's not an obligation, but you should do it. Good job. Tell your teachers I said, may Allah bless them. So the fourth one is to wash a quarter of the head, right? As the Prophet ﷺ wiped his head. So you see that every one has ayat of the Quran, a hadith to support. We already mentioned this. So the conditions which obligate the wudu, we covered them, but we want to cover them again a little bit more detail. Shartul wujub or shartu wujub, right? Which is the condition of obligation. Is the intellect, aql, and we talked about mental capacity. Bulugh, right, which is puberty. And we said that there's some biological markers, or age 15 or 18, right? We said that. In the madhab is 18. It'll come up here. Like here it says, though if this does not occur, if there's no physical, and then he says here, like, having a certain type of dream. No, they're putting it in the same range here. Just let's leave it for this, like 13, 18. But that's why it's either the markings. You can tell the body changes. Or just like if you assume automatic. If you can't determine by the biological signs, or sometimes things that are told to you, then all of a sudden it goes back to the issue of 15. But the opinion of the Sahibain, of Abu Yusuf and Muhammad, those are the close students, rahmatullahi alayhim, of Imam Abu Hanifa, and they agreed as well as Shafi, Ahmed, is that is 18. Here it goes right here. So the conditions that make the wudu an obligation are sanity or intellect, really, right? And Islam, right? And then we mentioned what this meant. Not in a state of coma, not asleep, right? And then not literally out of your mind. And I mentioned this before, but I mentioned it again. Islam, Imam al-Balkhi, rahmatullahi alayhi, he wrote a book, Sustenance of the Soul. Listen to that title, Sustenance of the Soul. And in there's a part of the book that was translated. It used to be like in a manuscript, handwritten, form, and it was not published, so to speak. But part of it was translated by a scholar, Dr. Malik Bedri, who deals a lot with psychological stuff, and it was translated into English. And so part of the book, he didn't translate the first part. It dealt with the issue of that mental health. Part of achieving it is physical health, having good physical health. And also being free from stress. Because we know when stress comes to a certain point, at a certain point, some types of stress, it freezes your brain from thinking properly. You ever get to that point of stress? You don't have to say yes, me, but just think about yourself. Have you ever get to that point of stress? You just get angry, and it becomes, hold on, I'm not even thinking straight at this point. That's important, because we don't talk about that enough in the Muslim community, but that has been there. It's been there. This is not only an issue that's solved with just read Quran and make dua. Sometimes if you have hypertension or high blood pressure and you're stressed out, it will lead you to not thinking straight, and then more stress, and then it becomes a problem on a mental level. You know what I'm saying? It becomes a problem on a mental level. So he said that. So the other thing that he said, Imam al-Balkhi, rahmatullahi alayh, and he was actually Hanafi too, I believe. One of the, also the things that he had said is our thinking, how we think about problems, and how we think in general. And what's the difference between the worker in today's time and the worker in the past? What's the difference? What's the difference?
The difference is that from the past, it's like they're kind of like slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And now for workers, they get money if they work.
Okay, so what other kinds of work do they do other than like farming and those types of things?
And now they create buildings.
Okay.
Past they create like farming.
Okay, so if they create buildings, what did they use first?
They use like
From themselves. What are they using? What part of their body? Okay, that's the laborer. And then who's the one that comes up with the idea?
the one who makes it architect.
Yeah. So architects are using.
Brain.
What about computer scientists?
They use the brain.
So you find like in today's time, a lot of people are using the brain.
Yes.
They're using the brain more for work on a longer hours, right? And so it becomes important to know how to give it a break. You know what I'm saying? That's important. So in any event, I think we got that. So there's certain type of thinking sometimes about how we think about tragedy. Sometimes when we overload, it leads to issues here. Although that's not part of the fiqh directly, is indirectly there, that we have to take care of this. We have to take care of the mind. It's not easy. I can't tell you enough how many cases I see. It's not easy. I have to say that over and over again. Because we've come to a place where, just think to yourself. What do you think comes after deep depression? What do you think comes after deep depression? We're seeing that all over the place in the Muslim community. So I'm not saying, there's no such a thing as depression. There is such a thing as depression. But there's clinical depression, and then there's that general depression that comes from different problems.
Is it a lot these days in Muslim community?
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. I'm very, personally, I'm very affected because I'm an emotional person. But the problem also too is that I come from, I was studying to be a priest. So it's like the type of community that I came out of is very organized. And the leadership in general is very trained to deal with certain things. And so I look at our community and I'm like, we're not organized, and then we're not properly trained, and we have all these problems, and we just keep making it. This deen is one thing, your idea of religion is another thing. A person's idea of religion is not equal to deen. You see what I'm saying? We have something that's called fiqh deen, or understanding the deen, and the tadayyun is the person's understanding of the deen. So we've seen in some cases, and it's not to to beat up on the imams, but sometimes, because sometimes it's not even the imam. Some people, their solution, everything is ruqya. Their solution, everything is ruqya. Ruqya is when they read over you certain ayat of the Quran. They make dua for you, right? Even sometimes they give you water that has like a blessing on it, right? Then the extreme side, which is problematic in the deen, they start going into magic. Yeah, that's not allowable Islamically. Even though some of the ulama, they debate about that, but still, the general rule, we shouldn't go there. You know, there's a side for health, physical health, mental health, doctors, that comes in. So some people, that's what they do. In Ramadan, we had 2 cases. And one of the community that I came from, it didn't go so well. We had Salat al-Janazah without going into details. Similar case in Texas a couple years back, 50 in one community. Sometimes we don't know because also the families, they cover it, and the masjid sometimes covers, and it's just like a normal janazah. You get the point what I'm saying? Or no? We'll talk about it, inshallah. So that's there. So in any event, we covered that. So here, the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha. The pen has been lifted from 3. A sleeping person until that person awakes. A person that's not considered puberty until the person attains puberty. So our children that are not pubescent, this is the time where we're training them, not obligating them. And like Sheikh Muhammad Shanqiti said, be careful how you educate the children at this time. From the angle of, don't make the deen something that is bitter to them, horrible to them, sweet to them because of the way you train. And we have some people, may Allah bless them, very beautiful people, but sometimes they deserve a nice real correction, that they like to scream at the children in the masjid. And if we have that, the masjid, it was even allowed to wrestle or this or that. The masjid is not, be quiet, this, that. That's not the appropriate way to create an environment where the children love the masjid. You see what I'm saying? And so we have to know that they may not be at that level yet. And even if they are at the level of puberty, you as an adult, do you like somebody to come to you? You did a bad job. Do you like that approach? You see what I'm saying?
For example, right? I mean, they're not reached the age of puberty, I understand that. But at certain times, kids say like, "Oh, I don't want to make wudu now." So how should I treat them? How should we treat that? Treat the kids at that time?
That's why I'm saying the younger that we get them, and it becomes like a routine. That's the science behind it. To know that, okay, they get to really, here when we say this, that there's no obligation on the pubescent child until the child attains puberty, but there's an obligation on the parent to teach, not to command. So the obligation comes back on you to remind you as a parent. So the thing is that's not easy. I can't give you, because I don't know. I don't know the situation. It could be a number of different issues that are there, right? So you have to kind of, you have to study your situation or a person in general has to study their situation. I'll give you an example. I know a child, and that child, it was discovered that that child has an issue with one of the eyes. Doesn't see properly from one of the eyes, sees properly from the other eye, right? So, certain things, if you send that child to school and you don't really know that, and the child is not performing in the class, you're punishing the child without understanding. There's another issue. Some children have hearing issues, right? Some children they watch the parents fight. And so part of what they do is, they act like that, right? There's some children that have hyper issues, and they've been like that since a young age. Even the mom will say, in the womb. See what I'm saying? So there may be some issues going on. So then all of that, I'm saying all of those issues, when you bring those issues into the discipline of the salah, the wudu, if you don't consider those issues, the child may not hear you, or the child may have other issues going on, attention issues, right? And so then we're sitting here saying, discipline like this, you have to get to know the child and the different entry points. And that's why, parenting is a job. I think we agree on that. Parenting is a job. That's why, and I'll be a little open, that's why people, they talk about, maybe some communities more than others, they talk about issue of polygamy, this, that. It's like, where are the fathers? You see what I'm saying? Being a father, it takes a lot. I know a case right now where there's a divorce case, and the sister was explaining to me different situations. I'm like, okay, well, being a parent, it involves both people, and it's not just, sister, this is your job, brother, this is your job. That could have worked in another time period, in another society. But here in this society, sometimes both parents have to work. Sometimes the mom has 3 little ones, and they're almost close to babies because that's how it was planned out or not planned out, whatever it may be. And she's extremely stressed. So if the father doesn't take the children, sometimes the father is working 40, 50 hours and doesn't spend any time with the children. And the children, they miss that. You see what I'm saying? So that's why sometimes when we start applying the ahadith of how do you implement the salah, this, that, you also have to look at the family and the responsibility. And that's why also schools are good. To create that's the whole issue of creating that environment where the children are impacted on how to kind of help the parents a little bit. So I don't agree with that side of, well, the parents is everything. No, what you got to do this. We find that in the system here. Sometimes they say, well, this is the parents' responsibility. See, hold on a second. Yes, in the general sense, we agree. But this is also the issue that it takes a village, it takes a community to raise a child. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, this is one of the issues of why there's so much pressure on husband-wife. Because husband-wife, they carry everything now, where they didn't. It was before you guys get what I'm saying? So the discipline side, this right now, we're going to this, the issue, we're going to this from the angle of the identity of maleness and femaleness and what that means. The society has decided we will take the opportunity to tell your children on what maleness means and femaleness means, right? You see what I'm saying? So the society is saying, because it's going to impact the way people operate. But we as Muslims sometimes we're not educating on these angles. So it's not only the issue of salah, but it's also everything that goes into wudu. That's why I spend a lot of time on this. And there's an age factor here. Everybody's age is not appropriate for the higher level discussion. But this issue of puberty, everything goes into that. You can't leave it up to somebody else to educate your children about male-female responsibilities. That's just not going to work. Because also, when you start teaching your children about wudu, you know, at a certain level, some things in wudu, they can be taught in a general way. But then there's other aspects of wudu, which is part of being an adult. Why you need wudu, why you need ghusl. You see what I'm saying? As a Muslim community, we put on the blinders. That's not going to work anymore. Right? And so even here, when you look at this, if you look at the sentence, see what I'm saying? So that becomes the issue. One of the things he's mentioned here also, القدرة على استعمال الماء الكافي, right? That one must also have the ability to use a sufficient amount of water to wash the limbs at least one time. If not, you go to tayammum. If you don't have enough water, you go to tayammum. The reason why that's mentioned is because in some madhab, like in the Shafi'i madhab, they say, well, if you have enough water to do this, you do this part with water, and you do the rest with tayammum. Now here, it's just you just default. You go, if you don't have enough water, you go to tayammum, right? And this is also important to understand this deen, that ability is important. If you know, what do we say about Hajj? Man istata'a ilayhi sabila. That's part of the hadith. The Hajj is an obligation, it's part of the arkan for the person that has the ability, the istita'a, to make the way to Hajj. And then there's conditions surrounding that. Safety, the wealth, to make Hajj. So the same thing with this. This is important. Like, you know, the deen has facility. Yeah, we have to have discipline, no doubt. We have to have discipline. One of the, like in the Indo-Pak culture, there's a big discipline when it comes to the salah. Make sure you pray the sunnahs before, make sure you pray the sunnahs afterwards, but we don't differentiate between this is fard and this is the sunnah. And so when we're differentiating between this is the obligation and this is the sunnah, all of it is the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The fard is part of the sunnah. But the issue is that sometimes we have to realize, you know, there's other obligations, and we mentioned this last time. Like for instance, the issue of, I may not have enough time. And I want to go to the masjid. I want to go in and out. And, you know, I have to go do something for the family. You know, or have some other thing. Or I'm at the workplace. You know, and the only amount of time that I have is only these few minutes in the break. And I need to get the salah in. Because guess what? My boss doesn't like me as a Muslim. And I know that. Or I'm in the airplane. You know what I'm saying? And I need to make salah, but I know if I spend too much time in the bathroom, you know, there's suspicion. Or if I'm at the airport, or there's certain situations. You have to, you know, it's not, everybody's not required to be an Abu Dhar. You know when Abu Dhar announced to everybody, I'm a Muslim, you know, at the beginning of the da'wah, he got beat up for that. You don't have to, you know, you have to navigate in these types of circumstances. So having the fiqh is important. Knowing the issue of ability, knowing what's an obligation, what's not an obligation. So then we have the issue, we covered some of that already, that being in a state of yani al-hadath al-hukmiyah. Right, that there's and here we talk about minor impurity, not in the bigger sense, not in the sense of needing ghusl, right? But you have to have wudu when you're in a state of what's considered an impure state by the Sharia. Like for instance, you pass gas. You know, you pass gas. You were eating something and you passed gas, or you went to the bathroom. That doesn't mean that you yourself are dirty. The Muslim is pure. You know, it just means that you're in a state now that the Sharia says that this is a state of impurity for the salah, not that you are impure, right? And so it also could be the biological issue that, you know, for instance, that girls go through or women go through. that needs to be absent, right? The absence of the menstrual state, right? Those things require wudu, when you're in the state of minor impurity, right? And then there's another issue. When there is inadequate time left for the obligatory prayer, the wudu must be made immediately. Note, at the beginning of the time of prayer, one has an extended time in which he can make wudu and offer prayer, though when the time is cramped, this obligates the wudu immediately. This is something in the Hanafi madhab that's unique. What benefit do you think is there in knowing this principle? What benefit is there? When there's inadequate time left for the obligatory prayer, the wudu must be made immediately. What's assumed that you know? Something is assumed that you know it here. Yeah, the issue of how much time do you have, right? So that assumes something else, that you're doing what with time. But in order to make a decision, what's going on with you in the time?
Confused.
No, not confused.
Not sure about it.
No, you're keeping track of the time. You're keeping track of the time. This actually is a very spiritual principle. فَذَلِكُمْ الرِّبَاطِ. There's a hadith which indicates to that effect in Muslim, that it says that the waiting in the trenches, like in wartime, you're in the trenches waiting, is like that example is given, and may Allah grant us that, is waiting from one salah to the other. So this here, the Shaykh is training us from the angle that, okay, we should be conscious of the time of the people already in general. But here is like being very strategic. How much time do I have left? This, that. But we usually think about this from the angle of the salah itself. But here he's saying from the angle of the wudu, that you should be in a state where the time bracket is there. Beginning of the salah time, end of the salah time. You should be in a state of mind in which you're not only aware of that, but you already are prepared for that salah. And in order to be prepared for that salah, you have to make wudu. Right? And so he's saying, okay, it's not just the issue, okay, now it's time to pray. But he's saying that you have to give yourself enough time, because when this time is cramped, then you're obligated to make the wudu if you don't have wudu, so you can pray. So what it does is it disciplines you, and it keeps you in that dhikr. It keeps you in a state of dhikr, like so. What happens to us today in the workplace and the going back and forth? For me, it's an adjustment being here, because I was in Ohio. That time I feel the difference. The way Dhuhr comes in, and then the way Asr comes in, it's like we don't have that in other places. And when you go up north in other places, it becomes a different issue. In the UK in Ramadan, it becomes another whole issue. So here, but in any event, the issue of the time for the salah, being mindful of it, but here is the unique point, is that, when the time is cramped, you don't have wudu, you need to give yourself enough time for the wudu to come in, because it's an obligation. It's an obligation. Is that clear or no? Am I making myself clear? You have to give yourself enough time to make the wudu and to make the salah. Because when the time is cramped, if you don't have wudu, the Shaykh is saying the deen is obligating you, go get wudu. Don't put yourself in a position where you're going to miss out on the salah because you don't have the wudu, and also the time for the salah is cramped. That more clear now?
If you have like very less time and you don't have wudu, you have to make a choice. Either you make wudu or you make the salah. So
Worst case scenario, which is not good to do. But worst case scenario, you make tayammum with dust. Why? Out of the obedience of the Sharia. Then you got to go back and redo. But to meet the time and the discipline and the obligation, you know what I'm saying? Then that's the worst case scenario, right? I mean, how many times some of us we catch ourselves, and this is another issue. It's not popular to say this, but how many times we catch ourselves, Salah is about to go out, our mind is all over the place, worry this, that, auntie in the hospital, wife is calling me, I had to pick up the children, I have a project due at work, this, all of that, and then you're in the car, and then you realize, oh my God, you're gonna have to sit down and pray. You understand what I'm saying? You're gonna have to sit down and pray. Yeah, you're stuck on the highway. That's even more problematic because you may not even be in the direction of the Qibla. But if not, then you either do that or you're going to have to combine. Right? And the problem that we have with all of this stuff is that combining, doing that, after a while, our deen goes out the door. After a while, the deen goes out the door. Right? Because you're bending and flexing so much. So, that's why I say, like, with this, it's a mental preparation. It's keeping us into a spiritual, mental awareness of the salah. But then we also have to know the tactical side. Some of our muftis, they get so caught into the formality that they're not looking at what's on the ground, the challenges that people have on the ground.
From other scholars too, that in some cases, yeah, you go ahead and do your salah, but then you have to redo it.
Yes.
I don't understand that concept.
The concept is that you're complying with the command to establish the salah in its time. So either now you may go outside of the context of the madhab in order to accomplish certain things, which is keeping your deen alive.
But you are praying, right? So why do you have to redo it?
Because you didn't fulfill the complete obligation. You know what I'm saying? You didn't complete the obligation as it should have been, and then that's called what we say ihtiyat, caution, so that it can be accepted properly.
The same thing, I heard in one case, like, if you're going abroad in an airplane and you don't know Qibla directions and the proper timing, you just, do your best guess, do it, and then, when you are on the ground, then you redo it.
That's out of ihtiyat, out of caution, but the reality of the ability, that's why I mentioned that. What are you going to do? Look, even the scholars on that point, that's complicated. Sometimes you're going to 3 time zones and you're traveling 24 hours. You yourself don't know if I'm in Chicago, if I'm in London, if I'm here or there, wherever. You don't even, I'm saying psychologically, sometimes you're on those flights and you yourself are just, your mind is all, I personally, my ears get really whacked out. So it takes me a while to adjust. I have a headache, an earache. It takes me a while to adjust, even energy-wise. So it's like sometimes in those flights, you're implementing, you're doing the best you can. You go to Hajj, you see that as a reality. It's very clear. Unless you're on an airline in which they're letting you know and they have a space to pray and this and that. But before that, when you're on the European airlines, you're traveling, you see what I'm saying? So it's the issue of trying to do the best that you can with principles, not just guessing 100%, with principles of how can you practice the deen in these tight situations, which were never the case. Nobody has ever experienced that until this time period. You're going to multiple time zones. You're in the air. You don't know if you're east, west, this, that. It could change or whatever. You can do things to make ijtihadat. You can ask what direction we're in, this, that. But, I personally, some people may not go with that. I personally don't advise you ask. That begins to look very strange on the airplane.
I'm beginning not to do that. I used to do that, but then I realized that even if you ask
So, in those cases too, some people, they get technical. I knew a brother who did that. He went to one of these sporting tactical stores and bought like a professional compass. Right? That takes you takes you outside of the realm of guessing without principles. So now you're with the professional compass and you're trying to figure out. The phones sometimes are not dependable. You put the phone in the compass on the phone, sometimes it's off, whacked out. So let's end there. This is a little different. We covered some of this stuff a little bit. Other than to say that, the pure water is to reach complete outer skin. And this is, you talked about this in the issue of ghusl, but we talked about the issue of this in wudu. And if the area of a pinhole remains in which water does not reach the parts that are obligated to wash, the wudu is not valid. It has to wet every part, and we mentioned the drops have to come off of it. Right? And so the other issue is that things that are incompatible with wudu must cease before completing wudu, such as the menstrual periods, the post natal bleeding, right? And the hadith. So, for example, if there's urine or blood which flows at the time of wudu, it's invalid. That's why we have to teach our children how to go to the bathroom properly. Right? And one must remove objects of dirt that prevent water from reaching the body, such as wax, fatty grease. And he mentioned this nail polish. This has become a massive debate, even to the point where the former mufti of Egypt, he had gave the okay with the nail polish. Now they have water nail polish or whatever, but it's become so. The issue of nail polish is not obligation. There was a sister, when I was in Puerto Rico one time, she was asking, well, do I have to take out the the makeup? I put so much time into the makeup. And you want to be like easy because from the angle of, you see she's struggling with her iman. But you want to say that's not an essential to the whole bucket. You see what I'm saying? But that's where some people are at. So this is the rule. Paint is makeup, nail polish. But, for people that where they're at and their iman is that they make that an issue, okay, fine, you give them that weak fatwa. But the reality is this. This is the norm, right? That these things should be in place so that the wudu can be perfect.
So the reality is they need to remove the makeup or the nail polish.
They should, but we have to be, we're at a point where people are cracking and breaking. We could be the strong Muslim all we want. See, you have to do this, that. But the reality is that, this has become so important for them. There's some fatwa that are out there. So you have to throw that in their face in a nice way. This is the rule. There's a fatwa that's out there, but you're not in real compliance. Okay, fine? That's up to you, between you and Allah at that point. But this is the rule, right? But that's where it has become. That's where we're at.
The fatwa is not to clean your face at all. The fatwa is like what you can.
The nail polish, there's two types. The water kind, that water supposedly goes through, and the non-soluble one, or the one that is like hard paint. Water doesn't reach. The fatwa in that it becomes, that it's allowable. But in reality, you know what I'm saying? We're talking that the rule is that the water has to reach. That's our deen. It's unfortunate, but we're debating about these types of things. The issue of the makeup, is more complicated from the angle that she should remove it. But when you have some Muslims that they're struggling with their deen, right? And sometimes sometimes to be honest with you, people may not like it, but sometimes when the sisters are like that, there's something going on. And from the angle of, I have to show my beauty to everybody. It's so important to me that, I have to have this on a daily basis. This is for me, not for anybody else. This, that. So sometimes you just have to let them be. Let them go from the angle of, okay, this is where we stand. I hope that I hope the water reaches. You know what I'm saying? Go ahead, go make the wudu like that. That's not the general rule, but make sure you complete salah. Just let them go. You teach them what the rule is. Say, okay, fine. Just let it be. Most sisters won't do that. Most sisters have an understanding. This is the struggle of most sisters, which is the issue of the nail polish. That deal with that issue. Some sisters that have nail polish don't assume that they, some sisters that have nail polish on, they do it at a time when their menses is on. But when we start talking about the issue of the wudu and under that. So the point that I was saying is that the fiqh of priorities. What's the priority? That she's praying imperfectly, still praying, even though with imperfections. We know that there's an imperfection there, or that we completely block the means to her praying completely.
When you're giving or teaching them, right? So this is not just about, again, is my understanding, this is not just about imperfection. If the wudu is not there, it is invalidating the salah. There is no salah there, right? So what
That's why we said we teach the rule. We teach the rule clearly. We teach it clearly, right? Then we say, okay, but there may be an exception for people that need that, not just to throw it out there. Because now we're looking at where people's iman is at. So they made the effort. Hopefully, Allah accepts. But as far as the rule, we know what the rule is. Some people say, well, no, how can you say? I can say that because I'm the one that's going to have to deal with the person leaving Islam. You see what I'm saying? I'm the one that's going to have to deal with the issue of the person struggling and just like trying to figure out mentally where they're at. You see what I'm saying about with the relationship to the deen? So we have to be careful in that regard. We have to build people's iman up stage by stage.
The idea is to keep as many people in the circle.
Yes, sir. That's the rule. Yep. Even if it has imperfection, does it meet the formality of the rule? No, it doesn't meet the formality of the rule. It does not meet the formality of the rule.
So this is not a formality, this is their obligation.
No, the formality of the rule is that she's completing the obligation. Is a possibility, because like we said with the issue of the nail polish, there's some nail polish which is water reaches. That's why I say formality, because now when we say nail polish, we have to go into the detail. What is it, the one that the water reaches or the one that the water doesn't reach? See what I'm saying? If a sister has makeup on, which is similar to like paint, you know what I'm saying? Is it makeup that it reaches, or is it just like eyeshadow? What is it? You see what I'm saying? That's why I'm saying the form of it. From the side of her intention, she wants to do it. But you got to realize that's where people are at.
Logically, a lot of time it doesn't make sense. To a lot of society, the way it just doesn't make, why we have to do this, why it doesn't make sense to them. So till they come back to the senses, when there's a maturity, 20 years back, I used to think different. Now we are more mature as we grow up, so just hope for the best.
You got 20 years, I got 20 years, but nobody knows like what tomorrow. So when the information is like today, you're not making the right wudu, that means your salah is invalid, and now it is up to you to remove the nail polish or not. That's what I want to remember.
Yeah, but see, but I agree with you. But some of the bigger scholars open that door from the angle of keeping the people in the circle. And then scholars start to debate each other about approach. No. I'm just saying that scholars start to debate each other, right? We have to realize where people are at mentally. You know what I'm saying? Just like we said, we're in a jam. We may be, Allahu Akbar. At face value, you say, hold on a second. Like, brother, why didn't you stop the car? And, some people may say that. Brother, you didn't stop the car. You could have gone here. Brother, why didn't you take enough time? You had 2 hours to plan yourself out. You see what I'm saying? So it's like we have our struggles, they have their struggles. There's also the issue of just maintaining, we are in the struggle. When we're not in a Muslim country, and even if we were in a Muslim country, it doesn't mean that there's no struggle. You know what I'm saying? There's some real struggles in some countries, like just staying alive. So the issue is that, that's what we teach the rule, and then we kind of like build the people up if they're not there. That's the point. See what I'm saying? We kind of build them up, keep them encouraged, keep them encouraged as much as possible. So that goes more into keeping them within the circle of Iman, even if with imperfections, versus pushing them out because we want the perfection to be there. But we also teach them what is the way to get there at the basic level. You just don't leave them and just say, well, there's some fatwa there and that's it. You tell them, like, yeah, there's a fatwa there, but that's not the rule. Right? And you try to get them to that point. I struggle with my daughter with that for a little bit. Then she's like, well, Baba, there's water, there's nail polish that's, the water goes through. And so then I went back and forth with her on that issue. But, she dealt with that. But actually, it's a different issue when you have control in your family or whatever. But we've seen people break with this. Like I gave you that example of the sister in Puerto Rico. Some people, that's why I said, I indirectly said, see what their mental state is. You see what I'm saying? You may be dealing with somebody that's lonely, no family, no husband. Here we're just focusing on the sisters right now. But it's you may be dealing with somebody that's struggling with issues. And then you're pushing the rule on top of that. And it just becomes like crack. We've watched people mentally break like that. Any other comments before we end?
Yeah, the fatwa goes with like individuals, not like
Fatwa is mostly individuals. It happened that in today's time, the fatwa, because of these computers and all of this, it became everybody. And that's the biggest problem. That we have the general rule. But without local scholarship, you know what I'm saying? Local scholarship can even be a region of the country. That becomes the issue. Fatwa, the way that it's given, is impossible for it to be accurate all the times. You have one person giving a fatwa, in some cases, another 1 to 2 people checking the fatwa. For millions of people, that's just not going to work. In every country, there's impossible. Right? That's not a correct way of fatwa. That's why really when you have fatwa that's given, fatwa for the ummah as a whole is never allowable for one individual. This is how we get into a person just coming up with any ideas. I'll even go to the extent of saying one person says, well, we're going to declare military jihad because we look in the Quran and the Sunnah and it says this. An individual claiming what people should practice that's going to impact society and the ummah, that's not allowable. It's harmful. Right? That's a harmful situation. Or you have other situations, that come up like economic situations. You have one individual giving a fatwa on economic situations. You know what I'm saying? And it affects tons of people. Harm and benefit, human safety, dignity, all of those things have to be included. But keeping the people within the fold is important. That's the key. Barakallahu fikum. Look,